Let's start by talking about one of the biggest contradictions for the modern musician.
Here's the thing nobody tells you. Gear quality is real. Better tools do sound better. So how is it possible that if you hand the producer or artist you admire most the worst DAW, the cheapest plugins, and a broken guitar, they will still make something great? Yet it's rare for you to achieve those results. And even when you do, it's always a struggle. The answer is simple. There are infinite solutions to a problem you can perceive and zero solutions to one you can't. In today's digital workflow, there are 1,000 ways to make a bad reverb sound good, to turn a cheap guitar into the coolest sound of a generation, or to make a broken vocal take sound iconic. But there is no fix for a problem you can't perceive. You can't improve a take you don't notice is off. You can't rescue a mix when you can't tell what's wrong. You can't change a sound or a part until you hear that it doesn't belong in the track or that it's fighting with other elements. So the real bottleneck under all of it is your perception. Every problem in your music is a perception problem first. And perception drives every single choice you make, from the notes you choose to play to the gear you decide to buy, from your preferences and taste to the confidence you have in them. And luckily, perception is not given at birth. It can be trained exactly like any other skill. So let's talk about how you can do that.
We have to start by making a distinction that can sound strange at first. You might have already tried to improve core skills for modern musicians.
You might have worked with apps that train your ability to identify EQ areas, trained with a metronome to develop a better sense of rhythm, or used ear training apps to refine your sense of pitch, maybe with exercises that ask you to recognize musical intervals. I've done all of that myself for decades. And the problem with this kind of training is this: it only trains your ear, not your perception.
It sounds like the same thing, I know, but once you understand it, you realize the difference is far from subtle. Here's what I mean.
Your ear is just the sensor that picks up the sound. And after helping thousands of musicians develop a better ear, I can tell you this: your ears work fine. Assuming you don't have any significant hearing loss, your sensor is good enough as it is. Perception, on the other hand, is about the feeling that musical sound creates in you and how precisely you're able to interpret it. That's what almost nobody really trains, for two main reasons. The first reason is what no other method or app tells you. Those feelings are unstable by nature. The same note, the same beat, the same sound, or the same sample can feel completely different depending on the context around it. And that context never holds still, because your ear adapts to whatever it just heard within seconds. The second reason is that when you train your ear on an isolated drill, the way apps and methods usually do, you only get better at that one drill, in that one context. Put it inside a real song, a real mix, or a real groove, and the feeling changes, so you're lost again. You trained your ear on the exercise. You never trained your perception to stay stable when the context moves. That's the whole difference. One doesn't transfer into your music, the other deeply transforms you, often beyond just music.
Now, there's another apparent contradiction for the modern musician here, especially when we talk about recorded music.
The question is, why do we need great perception if we can just edit everything later? Fix the pitch, quantize the rhythm, tweak a sound in the mix, and so on. That's true, you can edit almost everything nowadays, except the things that actually make the difference. You can't edit in a stylistic vision you never formed, because a unique sound or style is conceived in your head before it ever exists, and that only happens when your perception is vivid enough to imagine it. You can't edit in the musical ideas that never came to you, nor the melody or groovy part you couldn't grab before it slipped away. You can't edit in the creative flow you never felt, when making music is endless trial and error instead of something that comes from you. And you can't fix a sound if you can't hear that it's wrong in the first place. That doesn't mean normal listeners won't hear that something is off. They may not be able to identify exactly what it is, but they can still feel that the quality isn't there.
Not to mention that all of this is just about recorded music. If you're a live musician, you simply can't edit mistakes out. So, great musical perception is non-negotiable there. At this point, you probably agree that musical perception is the core of everything you do as a music creator. So much so that we think it deserves a category of its own. This concept is perception-first music education. We believe that music education, from the most humble schools to the highest level conservatories, must always treat musical perception as the core element to be taught and learned first and foremost.
It's sad to see how modern music education is taught online nowadays. Use this chord progression here. Use Formula X for a great chorus. Train with a metronome to improve your groove. Use this EQ move. Copy this chain and it will sound pro. Fix your pitch with this quick exercise. These are mostly tricks and templates that don't teach anything about how to perceive what your music or your specific situation actually needs. So in the end, the template doesn't fit your music because your track is different. The metronome doesn't fix your groove because you are perceiving the pulse incorrectly internally, and the ear training gap doesn't fix your pitch because pitch feelings aren't stable yet in your head. Those teachings don't train your perception at all, which is the only thing that can actually fix all those problems in the first place. They give you a fixed solution for an ever-changing problem, and it's never a good match. So you learn a lot of rules, but you don't actually grow. That's why you feel stuck. On the other hand, perception-first music education does the opposite. We don't teach you an instrument, a DAW, how to use plugins or formulas to apply to your songs. That knowledge is everywhere, most of it free, and you've seen how it still doesn't move the needle. That's why we focus on training your perception, the deepest, most foundational skill in music, the one that sets the ceiling on everything you make, on any instrument you play, in any style.
Let's better define the three layers of musical perception.
Pitch is the ability to identify notes, melodies, and chords directly by their feeling, so your ideas become vivid enough to play them instantly. Great pitch perception also allows you to sing or play in tune with ease. Rhythm is about creating a pulse inside you, keeping it stable, and perceiving rhythmic subdivisions like 8th or 16th notes with precision. This is what instantly separates amateur musicians from pros, and it is the backbone of every melody and riff you'll ever write. Just think about the fact that a melodic idea is a rhythmic idea first. So rhythm perception is not only about playing tight, it is also about being creative in your melodies, your chord progressions, and your arrangements. It's a core perceptual skill of music composition, just like pitch perception. Lastly, we have timbre and balance, which is about perceiving texture, space, and balance not as settings, but as feelings. But not only that, it's also about perceiving the vibe that a sound creates, the images, places, environments, and cultures it evokes. You can agree with me that a mandolin sound evokes a completely different context than a metal guitar sound. One can bring you back to the Middle Ages, while the other is strongly associated with something recent and aggressive. Timbre and balance is the layer that decides whether your music sounds and feels professional in the studio or live. It is an extremely essential layer for any modern musician. A problem in your music can hide in any of these three layers. Miss one area, and that's exactly where it breaks. Indeed, you might have already noticed how all the musicians, producers, or artists you admire have great perception across all three areas. It's not a coincidence, it's the reason why you like them. Perception-first music education is all about training these layers together until your perception becomes refined enough that professional results in your music are not a choice, but the natural consequence. Let's dive a bit deeper into each layer, starting with pitch. Use Your Ear as a brand has become known for its relative pitch method, which is the only ear training method rated as excellent on Trustpilot. If you are completely new to this, I encourage you to watch this entire video and then check out other videos from our YouTube channel. But just to give you a quick idea, our method was the first method where students were actually forbidden to train their pitch perception with standard interval drills because we clearly understood that they completely block the development of most musicians' ears for very specific reasons that we've openly shared in our YouTube videos. Instead, you train your perception inside the tonality, where notes actually live, so you learn the real feeling of each note. That's why the skills you develop in our method always transfer to real music, seamlessly. And when I say the feeling of each note, I mean something very specific. In any key, there are 7 notes, 7 scale degrees, and each one carries its own characteristic sensation, its own feeling of tension or rest, stability or instability. We call that the key's color of each degree. The first degree, the tonic, always feels like home. The 7th always feels like it urgently needs to resolve. And here's the key part. Each degree keeps its own feeling no matter which key you are in, so instead of memorizing dozens of intervals, you only have to internalize 7 sensations. From then on, you recognize melodies in any key by feel alone, not by calculating distances between notes. And this isn't just our opinion. It's backed by research on how we actually perceive pitch. Music cognition researcher Carol Krumhansel mapped how each scale degree carries its own distinct quality inside a key, and showed that tonal context shapes pitch perception so strongly that measuring intervals alone can't explain it. Other studies by Shepard and Jordan and by Dowling found the same thing from another angle. The listeners who perform best are not hearing isolated distances between notes. They are placing what they hear inside the scale they have internalized, recognizing each note by its degree and its function in the key. That is exactly what training the keys colors builds in you, and it's the opposite of the interval drilling most ear training is built on. I've just talked about recognizing notes, but recognizing chords by ear works exactly the same way. Many students went from 0 to recognizing melodies and chords by ear alone in months. Others learned to play by ear on the first attempt, without any trial and error. And these are just a couple of the benefits of developing an intuitive understanding of musical pitch. For you as a music creator, this is the layer where you start creating melodies, motifs, and riffs in your head first, which is where your most original ideas come from. Whether you are a singer or an instrumentalist, this is what allows you to improvise over a backing track and come up with catchy musical ideas without worrying, without planning notes on the table, and without fixing any notes later. It's what allows you to hear a melody in your head vividly and then know what chords to play under it without even guessing. It's what allows you to sing in tune and know how to play something you hear or imagine before you even touch your instrument. It's one of the core elements of the language of music. Not being able to speak it fluently is like wanting to be a writer without knowing the letters of the alphabet. It's crippling and it blocks the flow of ideas before they can even generate properly.
Let's now move to the second layer, rhythm perception. And this is where most musicians have a problem they don't even know they have.
The vast majority of music creators carry rhythmic perception issues without ever realizing it. And it's one of the biggest reasons music ends up sounding amateur. And I'm not talking about counting or reading rhythm or any of that. I'm talking about feeling rhythm with enough precision and stability that you have a solid foundation everything else you do in music can sit on. And this spans from instrumental technique to playing tight to melodic creativity and more. Let me show you what I mean, starting with one of the aspects I just mentioned. Listen to this. Now the same part again.
If you barely heard the difference, that is not the problem. That is exactly the point.
You can't perceive it yet, and that gap is a big part of why your music still sounds the way it does instead of sounding professional. The good news is that rhythm perception can be trained, like any other skill. So one thing is to hear whether a take was tight enough or not. But hearing it is not enough to actually play tight. Let's talk about what actually makes a difference, because it is not grinding with a metronome. The main problem is that most musicians follow the pulse. They hear the beat or the click or the drummer, and they react to it, constantly trying to land on it. That's because they have been told to do so by their teachers, peers, YouTube tutorials, and so on. Rhythm is important, so you have to listen to the metronome and follow it. Isn't that what happened? The problem is that when you follow the pulse like that, you're always a hair early or a hair late, because you are reacting instead of leading. Great musicians do the opposite. They generate the pulse from the inside. They are the source of the time clock. So the click or the band is just something they lock flock to, not something they chase. When you experience this for the first time and shift from following the pulse to generating it, you'll understand how this alone can make a huge difference. This is one core component of rhythm perception that lets you play tight on the first take, and it's especially important if you play live, where there is no fixing it later. Another common suggestion is to always count rhythm so you don't get lost. The problem is that counting is a purely mental act, and the moment your attention goes to counting, it leaves the one place it needs to be, which is the feeling of the rhythm itself. So leaning on counting doesn't build your rhythm. It quietly holds it back, because it keeps you in your head and prevents you from truly feeling it and becoming familiar with rhythm sensations. That's how counting actually works against you. The important point here is that your brain doesn't actually perceive rhythm as time. You can't hear time or touch it or hold on to it. What your brain encodes as rhythm is perception of movement. And this isn't just a manner of speaking, it's what the science shows. Music perception researcher Justin London points out that the same areas of your brain light up when you perceive or lock into a rhythm as when you physically move. Even when you are sitting completely still, your brain literally processes rhythm as movement. That's why, when trained properly, rhythm is felt as inner movement. So the key to becoming great at rhythm is to feel it in your body first. And this is where you get a benefit most people never connect to rhythm at all. Your instrumental technique is also movement. Whether it's your fingers, hands, arms, legs, or even your breath, depending on which instrument you play, we are always talking about movement. So when you train your rhythm perception through movement and it becomes stable inside you, your technique organizes itself around that same internal time, and your playing gets cleaner and more accurate on any instrument you pick up. Rhythm perception and technique are two sides of the same coin.
As I said, one of the first shifts is getting your inner sense of time in place. When that happens, you start to feel something else. Rhythm has its own tension and resolution, just like pitch does.
There is a rhythmic center of gravity in every bar, a kind of time tonic on beat 1, and everything pulls toward it and resolves into it. If that gravity is not internalized, you drift, and most musicians drift without even noticing, the same way an underdeveloped pitch perception loses the tonic of a key. When it is internalized, you stop drifting, and your rhythm holds no matter what you play over it. Now, all of that is about playing tight, and that matters. But if that is all you think rhythm perception gives you, you are missing the bigger half, the creative half. And for most music creators, this is where it really counts. Start with this. A melody is a rhythm before it is notes. Every melody, every riff, every motif has a rhythmic shape underneath the pitches. And if your rhythmic perception is weak, your ideas come out stiff or generic, no matter how good your pitch is. Melodies live or die on their rhythm first. And the bigger the library of rhythmic feels you have actually internalized, the more ideas you can hear and generate in your head, because your rhythmic vocabulary is your melodic vocabulary. A thin one is an invisible ceiling on how interesting anything you write can get. And once the framework is truly inside you, the whole thing starts happening in real time. This is the part that changes how it feels to create. When the rhythmic framework is not internalized, you lose your place in the flow of a track. The chords are moving underneath you, and if the framework isn't in your body, you can't feel the next change coming. So you fall back on counting and tracking it consciously, which drags you straight out of the creative moment. With it internalized, you ride the track instead. You feel the next chord arriving before it's played. You anticipate it, and that anticipation steers your melodic instinct toward the right notes. So the line you sing or play on the spot actually fits everything moving underneath it. That is the difference between fighting to keep up with the music and creating inside it, in real time, in flow. And it is also what gives a part its feel. Rhythmic tension and resolution, dragging or laying back on purpose, and syncopation are all rhythmic perception choices. And they are what give a line its emotion and its groove, not just its accuracy. And none of this is reserved for people born with it. If you can move, you already have what it takes to train this. It's not talent, it's perception. So that is the rhythm layer. Tighter playing and better technique on one side, and on the other, the rhythmic foundation your melodies, your grooves, and your improvisation are actually built on.
Let's now talk about the third layer, timbre and balance. This is the one that decides whether your music sounds professional or amateur. And I want to be clear, this is not just mixing. Half of it, if not more, is composition and arrangement. It is about the choices you make while you write, record, and produce, not after.
Just think of a Metallica song or any other metal band song with only clean guitars. Same notes, same rhythm, same everything. You just take one of the instruments, change its timbre, and everything falls apart. This is the power that timbre and balance hold. And if you are one of those musicians who primarily focus on notes, chords, and rhythm, timbre perception is very likely the area where your music is weak. Timbre is such an intrinsic part of modern music that it would make little sense to consider it less important or treat it as an afterthought that comes after pitch and rhythm. Timbre and balance have multiple critical listening subskills that feed into this layer of perception. Let me show you a few of them. Before I reveal the first one, listen to this. Now listen to this other version. I didn't add any tracks. I just changed one thing, the volume levels, and the whole thing clicks into place. You felt it even if you couldn't name it. Volume balance is the single most important skill in mixing, and it matters even while you're still writing. Today, you build the track as you go, so your rough balance becomes the lens you listen through. It doesn't have to be perfect while you're writing, but it has to live in the right zone. If the bass is bearing everything, or the drums are so loud that the rest of the arrangement feels far away, your perception of what the song needs gets twisted. Your ear adapts very quickly to whatever you keep hearing, so every decision after that is reacting to a false version of the track. You might add parts because the song feels empty, or avoid adding something because it feels full, when the real problem is only the balance you got used to. Then, when you finally mix it properly and turn that bass down, or put the drums where they actually belong, the whole arrangement can suddenly feel empty or wrong because it was built against a balance the finished track was never supposed to have. That's why balance is not just a mixing detail. It is part of composition. Volume balance is the most obvious example, but this is not the only balance area. There are many others. For example, EQ balance, meaning how bright or dark a specific sound or an entire track is overall. Then transient to sustain balance, meaning whether something feels too spiky, too flat, too percussive, or too smeared. You don't need to solve all of that perfectly while you are creating, but you do need to internalize a perception of balance strong enough that what you're creating from is close enough to the reality of the song. Otherwise, you're not building the song on solid ground. You're building on top of a distorted version of it. It's like building a house on ground that's shifting underneath it. Let's move to another critical listening subskill. Listen to this. Now this. The first one sounds thin and hollow. The second sounds solid, full, and also louder. I didn't add a single thing. No volume changes, even though it might have seemed so. I only aligned the drum tracks in phase and time. Most music creators don't even have an idea what this means. Whereas this single subskill of timbre perception enables a serious professional to immediately hear whether a track has been done by someone who knows what they are doing or not. And if you think you can just EQ your way from the first example to the second, that's not how it works. An EQ can never fix a timing or phase problem. In fact, it only makes it worse, adding new phase misalignment on top of what's already there. Phase and time alignment are not some obscure, impossible to understand concept. When they are explained properly, they are actually pretty straightforward. The hard skill is not understanding the definition. The hard skill is perceiving it, hearing when something feels out of phase or slightly misaligned in time before you even know exactly why.
And I want to emphasize the word feel here, because there are specific sensations that are connected to this, and that's what matters. It's not about hearing, it's all about feeling it.
This matters because phase and time alignment problems can come from dozens of normal things you do in modern music production. Layering 2 kick samples, 2 snare samples, or any 2 sounds to create another sound. Stacking synths. Combining bass layers, EQing a track. Because yes, EQ dramatically affects the phase of the signal. Parallel processing in general, which is whenever you split one sound into 2 paths and process one differently from the other. Also, certain plugins or plugins that are not behaving correctly can introduce timing or phase problems. So the point is not memorizing every possible place where this can happen. In a modern workflow, the list is basically endless. The point is developing the perception that catches it when it happens, so it never goes unnoticed. You hear the punch disappear, the image collapse, the low end lose focus, the snare sound thin, the track lose clarity, and you know what to correct. In a few words, if you want your music to sound punchy, polished, clear, and hard-hitting when it needs to, phase and time alignment are not optional. They are areas where your perception has to become excellent.
Let's get to a third subskill of timbre and balance. This is one of my favorite, the sonic archetype. Every sound carries a whole world. This is why when you listen to this, you're instantly dropped into a loud EDM club. Whereas this puts you in a 1940s ballroom you have never set foot in. Me, you, and every other human being absorb those worlds just by living and listening to music without anyone teaching us, which is why they connect all of us to roughly the same memories, ideas, or images. Now watch what happens when I take a sound from one world and drop it into the other. Done carelessly, it's just a mess. But done with intention, it can become something new that still feels right. That's hybridization. It is not copying or applying a specific formula, but it's definitely a process you can rely on once your perception gets at a certain level.
When you do this well, you don't do it logically. You feel what the song, the artist, the project, or your own identity, if it's your project, actually resonates with, and which pieces to take and how to put them together. It's like being a great chef who needs no recipe, who tastes the dish and simply knows what it's missing. A little more salt, a different texture, more contrast. You just feel what the song means and what it needs. And none of this is something you calculate. It can't be planned. It has to be felt first, and that only happens once your perception is trained. Because this is the part people miss. You don't have to be the best at perceiving pitch, rhythm, and timbre before you can do this. Not at all. I'm far from being the best. But until you can feel pitch, rhythm, timbre, and balance deeply enough and in enough detail, you simply can't produce a result that holds up as the real thing, because you don't understand the language of music and sound well enough to speak it back. The intuition everyone wants sits on top of that foundation. There is no shortcut around it. Another important point for some music creators is that they think they have to create something that is unlike anything else to succeed. And they are right. But this doesn't mean you need to invent a new musical language from scratch either, because a language nobody shares is one nobody feels. It connects with no one. Completely original music will never exist, because it won't sound like music at all then.
So creativity in music will always look like blending things together and maybe breaking a couple of rules rather than building from scratch.
That's why the main goal for any creative musician should be to create their unique way to speak the same language. Just like a writer can write an original romance by using the same grammar and alphabet everyone else is using. So hybridization is not the only way. There are other approaches as well. But this is a very useful and effective concept that often creates amazing results when handled properly. And it's actually how most creative artists arrive at their best work. It's not copying at all, because you don't copy a melody, a progression, or a specific sound. You extract the essence of the musical languages you love and drop them into your music with taste, balance, and originality. It's exactly like using the same ingredients to create a new recipe that tastes very different from the original one. This is exactly what the artists you admire do, and most of them couldn't even tell you they do it, because once your perception is good enough, the brain does it on its own, without asking you. You spend years hearing music you love, it becomes your influence, and a trained ear intuitively puts those influences together into something cohesive instead of a mess. That is the goal. And here is a brief clip of a famous musician admitting he did that in one of the most successful songs ever created.
Dude, stop saying I'm a good drummer, because I'm the most basic fucking drummer. If you listen to Nevermind, the Nirvana record, I pulled so much stuff from the Gap Band and Cameo and Tony Thompson on every one of those songs. All that. That's old. It's old disco. That's all it is. Can I not hear that? Nobody makes the connection. That's straight up Gap Band.
So hybridization is going to be a tool in your arsenal. The sonic archetype is the area of perception that enables you to improve at it, and then, once you become strong enough, you can start breaking the rules further if that's what you want to do, but not all at once and not until you've earned it. The important point is that developing your perception doesn't change or affect the direction of your taste. We don't tell you which language, genres, or instruments you should use or not use. The point is actually very simple. Right now, your taste is foggy. You know something moves you, you just can't say what. Training the 3 layers of perception turns that fog into something specific. You can finally say, I love this exact thing from that genre and that from another, and name it precisely enough to know what it is. That's your taste resurfacing made usable. That's how your music starts to sound like you. It's not someone telling you what to do, it's you having sharpened your perception enough that your taste reveals itself so clearly that you don't need to think twice. You just feel the direction that's right for you. Now, I've shown you just 3 sub-skills of timbre and balance perception. In this one layer, there are another 10, and as you've seen, they are not just about improving the quality of your mixes. They're also about composition and arrangement.
These 3 layers are essential whether you work in the studio or on stage.
For the producer and songwriter, they're how you finally make music that sounds professional, resonates with your artistic identity, and that you can be proud of. For the live and gigging musician, some of them matter even more, because you can't edit a performance or get a second take. Your rhythm and your pitch are exposed the moment you play. And timbre and balance is just as essential now, because the modern musician is part engineer, building backing tracks, creating your own sounds using amp modelers or synthesizers, and mixing yourself live. Different proportions for different musicians, but all 3 are non-negotiable. The truth is that you cannot be a great modern musician without being very good at all 3 areas of perception. Our main channel, Use Your Ear, is full of tutorials and exercises to start training your perception of pitch with our method. But before you try a single one, watch this video next. Because real progress isn't about the exercise itself, it's about where your attention goes while you practice. I've seen countless musicians get stuck just because they weren't using their attention properly. And if you don't learn this first, it's almost guaranteed you'll get stuck too, and your perception won't improve much.